In this lecture, I'm going to teach you how to create a sales demo to close deals quickly in just 5 tips. The reference for this lecture is the Data-Backed Research on Sales from Gong. Tip number 1, map your demo to the topics that came up in the discovery. First thing you do when you chat with a prospect is you're going to have a discovery call and you're going to figure out what are their top pain points, what are their top use cases, what features are they looking for. So when you follow up with the demo, what you want to do is you want to discuss and map the product features and use cases to exactly what was discussed in the discovery. Another key tip here, you want to put those use cases, those features in order of importance. Common mistake that people do is they start with the least important information and then they build up to what they think is going to be the climax. That is the opposite of what you want to do. I recently watched a recording of a SaaS demo and they didn't talk about the main feature until almost a half an hour into the call. So in the latter half of the call, what you want to do is you want to lead with the most important stuff to keep the interest of the prospect. Tip number 2, be structured. Don't jump around. Have an agenda, follow that agenda, be organized. Amateur salespeople are going to hop around a lot. They're going to improvise a lot. High performers don't operate that way. They operate with structure. Tip number 3, you want to have long calls. The data show that a typical successful call will be around 47 minutes. When you look at other unsuccessful calls, they're going to be closer to half an hour. What's the reason for this? Is it because they have longer decks and they're trying to go through every single feature in the product? No, the reason is because conversation is stimulated, and that's what you want to do. You want to generate interest, you want to generate conversation. Tip number 4, talk in bursts. If you're talking too much over an extended period in one little pitching session, this is a bad sign. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be talking too much, because you should be talking more than the prospect at the demo stage, perhaps less so in the discovery. But the key thing here is, in a given period, are you talking too much? A good sign is when you're getting interrupted because you're talking in short bursts, and then you're able to see that the prospect has some interest in what you're saying. And lastly, tip number 5, you want to follow this type of sequence. So number 1, you want to talk and start with a contextual overview. So this might be something like an industry trend. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly show you an example of this. So Shopify Plus is the Shopify solution that's for enterprise. That's for large companies, large brands. And you can see the way they frame the problem here. They're talking about a macro trend that's happening in the industry. And they say legacy enterprise software is broken. And then they dramatically animate it here with this broken text. And then they say the world of commerce is changing. It's time to change with it. And only then do they segue into the product details. That's the type of thing that you want to do when you're doing the sequence in your demo call, in your demo presentation. Start with the high level and then get into the specifics of your product. Another good example of this is what is called the greatest sales deck that this person's ever seen. They're talking about Zuora, and what they do is they start with a big relevant change in the world. That's the starting point to build enthusiasm at the beginning of the demo call. But what do you do after you've set that context? Well, then you're actually getting into the product details. You're getting into what you might actually call a demo. And what you want to do here, as I mentioned earlier, is start with the most important use case. And if it's not a use case, maybe it's a specific feature, depending on how complex your product is, and then follow it up with the second most important use case, third most important, etc. And you'll know what that sequence is based on the discovery. All right, step number 3, there should be increased interaction at this point. So you were dominating in the beginning, giving the context, getting into the product details. Now, what's happening ideally in the demo is that there's some enthusiasm that's building. There's some acceleration. So there's more chit chat and back and forth as the demo progresses. Now, at the end of the demo, what you're going to do is you're going to wrap up with pricing and next steps. Now, in losing demos that don't result in closed deals, what happens is they don't talk much about pricing and they don't devote enough time talking about next steps, or they don't talk about next steps at all. That's how you make things progress. You talk about pricing and you move things forward. And those are the 5 tips for successful demos that close deals quickly.